We've long been told that the 1918 to 1919 influenza pandemic, the so-called Spanish flu, was caused by a hypervirulent virus that appeared from nowhere, sweeping across the globe and killing tens of millions. But new research reveals a different and disturbing truth. Could it be that the deadliest killer wasn't the virus at all, but something far more familiar? A virus or something more? In 2008, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases made a startling announcement. They confirmed what autopsy studies had suggested all along. The majority of deaths during the 1918 pandemic weren't caused by a flu virus. They were the result of secondary bacterial pneumonia, massive bacterial infections caused by common upper respiratory tract bacteria. These bacteria were already present in many people's systems. What changed, then, to cause such widespread and deadly infection? The case against the flu theory. For decades, we've accepted the idea that a new flu strain came out of nowhere, mutated into a killer, and disappeared just as quickly. This theory has formed the basis for global pandemic preparedness ever since. But there's a problem with that narrative. Dr. Karen Starko, a medical researcher, examined records from the time and found something alarming. The symptoms, rapid progression, and deadly results were highly consistent with salicylate, or aspirin, toxicity. In particular, she noted two distinct patterns of death. First, patients who succumbed gradually to bacterial pneumonia. And second, those who died within hours, in shocking and mysterious fashion. Aspirin, the double-edged sword. Aspirin, known for its pain-relieving and fever-reducing properties, had exploded in popularity around 1918. With the flu pandemic causing global panic, governments and physicians turned to aspirin in high doses to fight fever. But this widespread and uncritical use had deadly consequences. Aspirin is now known to suppress immune function, making the body more vulnerable to bacterial infection. In high doses, it can cause pulmonary oedema, fluid buildup in the lungs that can lead to suffocation. In the 1918 pandemic, the doses recommended were up to 30 grams per day. Today, we know that anything above 4 grams a day can be toxic. The deadly dosage. Patients were often administered 8, 10, or even 30 grams of aspirin daily, especially in hospitals and military camps. The medical belief at the time was that fever needed to be forcefully controlled. The more aspirin, the better. But this mindset created a perfect storm. As fevers dropped, so did immune resistance. The lungs, already inflamed from infection, were further damaged by the effects of salicylate toxicity, leading to massive internal hemorrhaging and respiratory collapse. Doctors at Camp Dix, for example, described the disease as a veritable plague, with extreme cyanosis, rapid onset, and sudden death. Distinctive symptoms, misread signals. The classic symptoms of aspirin overdose include hyperventilation, vomiting, headache, confusion, drowsiness, bleeding from the nose, and ultimately pulmonary edema. Sound familiar? These were precisely the symptoms observed in the 1918 flu victims. But at the time, no one knew how to distinguish between infection-related respiratory failure and drug-induced pulmonary collapse. This confusion masked the real cause of death, attributing the toll to the flu virus rather than to the treatment. Why the young and healthy died. One of the great mysteries of the 1918 pandemic is why it disproportionately affected healthy young adults, those typically most resilient to disease. Starko's analysis provides a chilling explanation. Those groups were the most likely to follow medical advice and take the new drug in full doses. Military members and young workers were regimented, obedient, and given large doses of aspirin in hospitals and field units. By contrast, children, the elderly, and people treated at home with traditional remedies often fared better. In fact, pediatric texts of the time recommended hydrotherapy, baths to manage fever, instead of pharmaceuticals. And when the 1920 edition was published, it specifically condemned the use of coal tar products like aspirin in full doses. The role of advertising and pharma. A lesser-known aspect of this tragedy lies in the pharmaceutical industry's influence. In February 1917, Bayer lost its patent on aspirin in the United States. As competition exploded, so did advertising. Bayer launched aggressive campaigns to portray its aspirin as the gold standard for fever treatment. Doctors were flooded with promotional material. Nurses were trained to administer it liberally. The public was reassured that aspirin was safe, even at high doses. But no one understood the consequences. The forgotten success of homoeopathy. Amid the horror, some doctors avoided aspirin and saw better outcomes. Homoeopathic physicians who used natural treatments and avoided aspirin recorded significantly lower death rates. In Philadelphia, Dr. Roberts treated 1,100 influenza cases and lost only one patient. Dr. Pearson treated 150 soldiers and saw just one death. Their methods focused on supporting the body's healing processes rather than suppressing symptoms. Yet these results were largely ignored by mainstream medicine, then and now. A dangerous legacy. The misdiagnosis of the 1918 to 1919 pandemic has had far-reaching consequences. It became the basis for a century of pandemic planning based on fear of a hypothetical supervirus. Massive government spending, international emergency frameworks, and mandatory vaccine laws were all justified by the idea that a viral monster once wiped out millions. But if the real killer was a pharmaceutical drug, and not a virus, then our entire approach to pandemic preparedness needs to be re-examined. Learning from history before it repeats. Today, we place enormous trust in modern medicine. But history teaches us that even well-intended treatments can be dangerous if not fully understood. The 1918 pandemic was not just a natural disaster, it was a medical catastrophe, amplified by the misuse of a then-novel drug. As we continue to face new viral threats and pharmaceutical solutions, let us remember the lessons of 1918. Sometimes the cure can be far deadlier than the disease.